Okay, and that's when people start coming. Okay, welcome back this afternoon to Building Your Bridges. So we have Margery Brennan here with us today. She
afternoon, my nap.
Gotta mute everybody. Okay. Margery has been 30 years of experience working with marginalized population as an educator, administrator, case manager, and clinician. She specializes in healing-centered engagement that is based on brain regulation. After a combined 30 years of working for Hilltop and School District 51, she is now in private practice offering case consultants for GALs, restoration services, family navigation, and addictions treatment. Without further ado, Miss Margery, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here today. Kathy and I were just talking about 3 o'clock on Friday as being the bewitching hour. So I hope the information that I have to share with you today is going to keep you engaged. I encourage questions. It's really most important that the information that I share with you is relevant to your current situation. And yeah, so please, if you've got questions or wondering how this information is applicable to yourself personally, to your professional world, please ask. The one thing that we are all going to have in common in this conversation is the fact that we all have brains. So the information that I'm going to share with you, I guess, Kathy, we could put the PowerPoint up.
Okay, let me share my screen.
That one.
Okay, is that where we're at?
Yeah, you can go to the next one. Next one. I'm sorry, back one. So this information that I'm sharing with you today is the brain's response to stress. And we are sort of in a culture today where we talk a lot about trauma. And trauma is obviously a stressor to the brain. I want to sort of ask us today just to take a perspective of all of the things in life that cause our brains to be stressed out. And this will be most meaningful, I think, if you can, as you digest this information, if you personalize it first and think about how your brain operates, and then how this information can be used in connection with the families that we work with, kids that we work with. Okay, next one. I originally did this presentation for foster grandparents, and this was one of the first questions on their mind is, what is the matter with kids these days? So again, hopefully we'll have some.
The adults didn't take care of them.
There you go.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay, next one. Okay, so this today's learning really is also about grace for adults. Adults, we care, and this particular process of engaging with kiddos and other humans that have wounds, it's challenging, it's hard, it gets sad. So again, it's about grace for all of us adults, and hopefully through that process we can have a higher level of self-awareness with how our brains operate and how that can impact our interactions with everybody else, not just our clients, but everybody else. Okay, next. So we're gonna talk first about neural pathways, and this information came from Dr. Bruce Perry. He's a neuropsychologist. He was one of the first clinicians to respond to the YFZ fundamentalist ranch in Texas when all of the children were taken away from their families, when they sort of did that raid on the ranch. So he started his research at that particular point, and I was lucky enough to be trained by him and go through this process. So everything that I'm sharing with you today is based on his work with neuroscience. And fundamentally, we talk about neural pathways in our brain, and those neural pathways are the superhighway. And I'm going to shut off the lights here for just one quick minute so I can show you my visual aid. Hopefully you can see this. This is a great example, a visual of neural pathways in our brain. They are the information superhighway, okay? So these messages are constantly triggering in our brains. And today we're going to talk about the kind of work that, if you look, takes our superhighway and creates a more direct route. So we're gonna learn a little bit about how we can train our brains to do this rather than to be in this constant state of hypervigilance that's this. So just the knowing that the brain, no matter the gender of the brain, the race of the brain, the ethnicity of the brain, this is the way the human brain operates. And we still really do have pretty reptilian brains when it comes to our function in the world. So we're going to go from this to this. Chaos to control. All right, I'm going to turn the light back on, and Kathy, if you'll give us our PowerPoint back. So the good news is brains are meldable. They have plasticity, which means that they can change. And I know that oftentimes we get super frustrated when it comes to behavior change, saying that, oh my gosh, it's just so hard and it doesn't happen. Again, hopefully by the end of our conversation today, you'll have a greater understanding about how to make that change happen and absolutely know that it is possible. Next one. So this is obviously a picture of a field where somebody has driven in the mud. And then we have sunshine. And as we know, over here in Western Colorado, that's probably a lot like concrete, right? And if I were to take my vehicle and put the wheels in those ruts and press on the gas and let go of the steering wheel, my wheels are going to stay exactly in those ruts, and I have to do very little driving, right? Our brains work very much the same way. Right? It's one of those neural pathways. It's sort of like the road more traveled. It's the Patterson, it's the North Avenue, it's the Highway 50. You get on it, you go, and don't really have to think a whole lot about how we're getting from here to there. So one of the functions that our brain serves is to process this information with as little amount of energy as possible. So we get in these ruts and we just go. Now imagine, if you will, that there was a rainstorm and I put my vehicle wheels in those ruts and I press on the gas and let go of the steering wheel. What will happen is I could go a certain amount, I could go maybe 5 or 10 feet, and there's a chance that my wheels are going to turn, right? And they're going to create a new route, a new rut, until we get to the point where it gets hard again. And then we do one of two things, and it's not obviously this simple, but we say, oh, we've reached a roadblock. This is going to take a lot of time and energy to pass. I'm just gonna throw it in reverse, go back and get on that route that I know. Okay, so our brain does this with such quickness and ease that we sometimes don't even know it's happening. If you've ever tried to change a behavior, say change weight or lose weight or begin a new habit like exercising, think about pushing through that through that mud, getting to the point where it's, oh, this is hard, and going back to what we know. So when it comes to our brain's response to stress, when it comes to behavior change, this is what our neural pathways are going to try to get us to do, because it's the path of least resistance. Okay, next one. And we're going to talk about 4 key areas of the brain today. Obviously, when it comes to science, these are simplified. So for the sake of our conversation, we're going to go from the top down or the bottom up. Top is our cortex, which is our thinking brain. That typically is not fully developed until around the age of 25. Next brain, we're going to go down now, would be our limbic brain, which is our feeling brain. Anybody that works with adolescents knows how very large and alive the feeling brain is. Down one more would be our midbrain, or our diencephalon, which is responsible for motor action. And then the very bottom, of course, is our brainstem, our lizard brain. These are unconscious functions that our body just absolutely has to engage in to stay alive. So as we talk today, our brains go through these 4 places often and always, unless we are aware and we request, please stop here, stay here, do this. So I'm not suggesting for a second that we are just in one brain and we don't float continuously throughout all of these. So just for the basic sake of our conversation today, these are the 4 areas of the brain that we're talking about, and we go in and out of them continuously throughout the course of a day, depending on our experiences and, again, what kind of stressors we're under. So bottom is our brainstem, like I just talked about. These are the unconscious functions that keep us alive. Thankfully, we don't have to tell our heart to beat. This is our lizard brain. This is our most basic brain. And this is where our core trauma symptoms are housed. And here's why. Typically, trauma, especially trauma that's life-threatening, sends a very clear message to our brain. Okay, and when I don't know if I can see this without the light on, but trauma happens and we've got this in our brainstem. Okay, and it's because a life-threatening event is a message to our brainstem to say, oh, we got to do something about this. We got to be sure this doesn't happen again. This is serious. This could jeopardize this person's aliveness. Okay. It's unfortunate that we don't have the same sort of pathway development when it comes to joy. Joy isn't something that we have to stay alive. Okay. So trauma also is all relative, really depending on a person's level of tolerance, their resilience. So many factors determine how a person copes with or perceives or manages a traumatic experience. So what could be traumatic to me could be nothing to somebody else. So I encourage all of us to try to really be aware. When we say the word trauma, our little brain is going to take us to a place where we might fall into the trap of comparing. Like, oh, that's not that bad, or come on now. You know, you got to be able to just put your bootstraps on and deal with that. So just kind of be aware that trauma is all relative, and those core experiences have built those pathways in our stem, just like I showed you in those in the picture of the rut. Trauma has those ruts, joy does not. Okay, next one. So we're going up in our brain. Our midbrain, or our diencephalon, is responsible for motor regulation, depression, appetite, satiation. This is where we have a message going on in our brain. This is where you might see the body be put into motion as a response to stress, hitting something, slamming a door, flipping somebody off, throwing something, punching a pillow. That is sort of when our midbrain is regulating our behavior, telling us we got to do something with all of this energy. And bam, the chair goes flying across the room. Okay, next one. Next one is our limbic system. This is sort of the home of alcohol and substance abuse. And we know that because alcohol and substance use are a quick, easy fix to change the way we feel. It's going to work every single time. It doesn't mean we're going to feel better. We're just going to feel different. So our limbic system, especially when it comes, like I said, to teenagers, that's where when our limbic system is regulating our behavior, we are going to react versus respond. Okay, if the limbic system is telling us how to be, we're more often going to react emotionally versus if we're in our cortex, we would respond logically. So again, in the teenage world, the job of a teenager really is to be moving up in that cortex development. And there's a long pause in the limbic system to sort of figure out what's happening here. There's all kinds of research, as you know, around gender and feelers versus thinkers. Really just, I think it's personal permission, it's our culture, it's how comfortable we are. We all have this. I guess it's just the level of the willingness to share or be aware. Okay, next one. Okay, our top brain is our cortex. That's responsible for abstract thought, as well as concrete thought, which is somewhat of a dichotomy. This is really where that higher level thinking occurs. Again, if our cortex is regulating our behavior, we are going to respond. If our limbic system is controlling our behavior, we're more apt to react. Okay, so next one. So this is what Dr. Bruce Perry calls the arousal continuum, and it's state-based dependence, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the continuum starts in calm and goes clear to terror. And again, this cycle is rarely stagnant, and it doesn't have to be every single step. It's certainly going to be situational. It's going to really depend on the individual. But the important thing to remember is the higher the stress, the lower the brain. Up in stress, down in brain. And again, our brain stem's primary function is to keep us alive. So it's not always able to differentiate. This is what it sees when it comes to stress. Okay. Everything is a red alert, red alert, red alert. So especially when you talk about kiddos with trauma, remember those core symptoms are stored in the brainstem. That hypersensitivity, that hyperreaction is because there's these messages constantly saying, danger, danger, danger. So the as we go through the continuum, we start with calm. Okay, Kathy. So calm is, I like to say calm is Sunday morning when your house is clean, your bills are paid, weather's beautiful, you get to own your time, you get to experience whatever kind of joy you want. You're in this place of Zen. These are the times when you're not going to learn algebra when you're in the state of calm, right? You're going to be able to be creative. You know what I mean? You're just in that place of Zen. And as humans, we do not get here often enough. We trick ourselves into thinking we do, but we really don't. This is where we have to be in order to send the message to our brain that you can go to sleep. And if any of you have had the experience where you're about ready to fall asleep and you like do this, have this jolt of energy, oftentimes that's because your body subconsciously is still processing all of the information that it absorbed during the course of the day. And it has to do that, right? It's got to do something with everything that's coming in. Once it gets everything categorized and stored, then there's a message that goes to your brain. It sort of goes from this to say, okay, you're calm now. You may go to sleep. And I'm sure all of us have the shared experience of trying to go to sleep and we are way up in our cortex, right? Our brains are, we're like, no, that's not what we want. Shut them down. Okay. So calm is a place that I encourage everybody to try to visit more often. This is where self-care lives. This is not, this isn't selfish. It's so very important for us to do this for ourselves. And we, again, especially teenagers, trick themselves into thinking calm is maybe playing video games or looking at their phone. Anytime that you still are feeding your brain with information, packing those neural pathways, you're not going to be able to really get to a place of calm. If you've ever also had one of those aha moments where you're trying to maybe think of somebody's name or, and then, 3 hours later you go, oh, I got it. It's really because you've been able to relax and allow your brain to access. Okay, next one. Okay, so remember, up in stress, down in brain. So the state of alert is where I hope all of you are right now. You have to be a little bit uncomfortable to be in a state of alert. Okay, your interest has to be piqued. Something novel really needs to be occurring in order for our cortex to say, oh, hey, I need to know about this. Even on the very best day and the very best circumstances, as humans, we're capable of digesting about 80% of the information that comes in. And that's a lot. So, because we have competing interests. Just right now, my phone is silenced, but it just vibrated. So it just is. Okay, so if we think about school, ideally we want students to arrive in a state of alert, right? We want them to walk in and be able to access their cortex for learning. We know that kids, probably 2/3 of the kids that walk into classrooms are not accessing their cortex. They're not in a state of alert. And I know each and every one of us has an experience of, I don't know, you're trying to leave the house, your car won't start, you're in a conflict with your spouse, we're in this state of alert, and that quickly can up in stress down in the brain. So when we are in our cortex is engaged and our limbic system is okay. We feel emotionally, we feel okay. We're not super worried about anything. We're feeling good. Okay, so given that, think about how difficult it is just to get into this state of alert and stay there for very long, right? Okay, next one. Next on our continuum is alarm. And especially from a school setting, just naturalistic observation, you can see the number of kids and adults that are in a state of alarm. We're walking around on this edge a large percentage of the time. Okay, so we've gone up in stress, which means we've gone down in our brain, and we are very limbic at that time. We've got big feels about a lot of things. This is when dysregulation begins to occur. And I'm on this personal campaign to stop the language around, oh, the kid blew out. Tires blow out. We blow out candles. What happens is we become dysregulated because of stress. And again, we don't get to say what's stressful for anybody else other than ourselves. So dysregulation begins to occur when we're in a state of alarm. And we are very much in our limbic system. Okay, next. Then we move from alarm to fear. And this is when we've gone up in stress and down in our brain. So now we are in our midbrain, our diencephalon. And this is when the body is going to do something with that energy. Okay, this is the start of fight, flight, or freeze. And the other one, flock. This is sort of where that lives. Our body has to do something with this energy. And what happens is really going to be contingent upon very much that individual's personal experiences, their level of safety. This is fear. It's okay? This is this rapid fire. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Adrenaline is pumping through the body. Heart rate increases. So each person is going to handle that in a different way. If you've ever seen a kiddo sort of in a fetal position under a desk, they have frozen, they've disassociated. Oftentimes kids will hoodie hide or they'll turtle with their jackets, and unfortunately could potentially get in trouble for that behavior. Dysregulation has occurred and the body's going to do something with that energy. Okay, next one. And then terror, and that is when we are completely in our brainstem. If you've ever had an experience of like having a child about run out in the road when a car is coming, this is where that sort of superhuman body strength comes in, where people are able to, have this energy that is superhero-ish, right? Our brainstem has completely taken over. We are not accessing our cortex. It's not like we're going to stop and go, gee, I wonder what I should do now, right? There's typically the brainstem perceives a threat that is so severe that the brainstem has to take over. Now, again, for somebody without maybe those core trauma symptoms, this could look like this horrendous event. For somebody with those core trauma symptoms, this can be something that somebody else could look at and perceive and go, really, was it really that bad? Right? So just understanding and appreciating that continuum of stress, each person's individual process through that, and their development of those neural pathways. Okay, next. So I'm going to hopefully be able to watch this video. This is our window of tolerance. This is a lot about what caregivers can do and kind of explaining the brain of a little, but it is very applicable to our brains in general.
Yes, ma'am. I'm trying to finish this, Maury.
Blended into your thing.
Oh, well, I'm listening.
Is there supposed to be sound? Because I can't hear.
It's just music.
Okay.
Was good.
Okay, I'm sorry that you couldn't hear the music, but that's all it was music. Okay, Kathy, if we want to go back to the PowerPoint. Okay. Okay, so even though the video talked a lot about children, it's really applicable for all of us. We all have a different level of tolerance, and we got that based on, again, our life experiences, our culture. There was a slide talking about safety. And again, remember that the brain stem's primary job is to keep us alive. So the hyper alertness when it comes to safety can look very, very different for different people. If we think about an infant, and let's go even in utero. A woman is pregnant and she is experiencing stress. And that stress, again, brainstem can't differentiate. Maybe my stress is because I don't know what color I'm going to paint my nursery, versus the stress of I can't pay my rent. I'm concerned about my other children. All sorts of things can influence safety. So I'm just gonna take a minute to sort of describe in utero what happens when the body is stressed out. Cortisol is released. So cortisol is going to impact brain development. So depending on the amount of cortisol that is deposited, if you will, from the mom, and this is not a judgment on anybody, it's just the way that our brain operates. Okay, different parts of the brain are going to develop differently. So perhaps there's increased cortisol throughout a pregnancy. Developmentally, a baby's brain can be baked in cortisol when it's born. Okay, so perhaps the limbic system had the most in utero injury. And then you take the environmental circumstances of an infant. For example, babies cry to get their needs met, right? So if I'm an infant and I'm hungry and I cry 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 and I cry, and I never get that need met, when we think about the development of those neural pathways, I don't have a solid pathway in my brain that's going to tell me I've got this need and here's what I'm going to do to get it met, right? It's going to look a lot more like this, okay? Consistency when it comes to caretaking helps develop those pathways between a need and the safety that occurs when that need gets met. So the inconsistency causes this, okay? And then you have that baby's brain that just really isn't quite sure about the world, okay? So everything is sort of, I don't know. So you could have an infant that is needs their diaper changed. And they cry and they cry and they cry and it gets changed. this time. And next time they cry and they cry and they cry and they cry and it doesn't get changed and I have a diaper rash. And 2 times from now, it gets changed. So that inconsistency never allows for that neural pathway to develop, other than the neural pathway that says, I don't know what's going to happen. So that not knowing creates this level of unsafeness. And again, remember, when we don't feel safe, our brainstem is going to send a message that we better be on hyper alert. Everything we're not so sure about the world. So when we see maybe especially littles, that their window of tolerance for change seems to be real small, especially in school. That's the brain saying, oh, I don't know if this is safe. And as we are trying to create the safety without consistency over time, that neural pathway doesn't get built. And as caretakers, it gets very, very frustrating because we say, gosh, we're trying so hard, and this time it worked, and then this time it didn't. What that means is there hasn't been consistency long enough to develop that pathway. So I know that when I say we, I'm really talking also about the school system and behavior change. Gosh, we've tried everything and nothing's working. What it really means is maybe we haven't tried the one thing long enough. And what happens to caregivers is it gets really tiring, very, very tiring. So we talked earlier about dysregulation. Okay, that means as we're moving up in stress, we go down in our brain and we really become dysregulated. Perhaps our limbic system has taken control and we've got big feels. And then our midbrain says, what are we going to do with these big feels? And for adults, if you're driving on Patterson at 5 o'clock, horns start flaring and fingers start flying, right? So for just recognizing that means we've become dysregulated. And so now we're going to kind of talk about how we can be regulated. So again, some of this information was specific to students, but if we look at what is the function behind this dysregulated behavior, okay, there's a stress response going on. And oftentimes it looks like non-compliance. It looks frankly like kind of some poo-poo-headed behavior, right? I'm asking you as the adult to do this and you're kind of just telling me, I don't want to do that. Okay. I am not suggesting that it's okay. All it means is that that particular person doesn't have the skill really to identify the emotion that's happening. And we have a generation of people now, especially young people, that know happy, mad, and sad. Okay, our world is going so fast with such information all the time. It's difficult to stop and say, what are we really feeling here? Are we embarrassed? Are we afraid? Are we excited? Are we concerned? It's super easy when it comes to those neural pathways that are down deep, just to say we're happy, mad, or sad. Okay? It takes a different set of skills to say, oh, I'm embarrassed. Like my teacher's going to ask me to read out loud and I'm embarrassed. I can't do it. Right? So then our little brain, our brainstem is going to go into safety mode. And that's when you're going to see dysregulated behavior that is designed to combat the perceived fear, right? Okay, don't ask me to read out loud. What I'm going to do is start taking my pen and poking my neighbor. Okay, if I'm at home and I've become dysregulated about an emotion and I don't quite know what to do with it. Yelling at my sibling, yelling at my parent, some sort of distraction that the brain says, okay, you got to do something because this is red alert. Those are the moments, and again, this isn't just about children, this is about the human brain, that behavior is a solution. It's a solution for that person, and it's a problem for everybody else. So if you're caretaking for a kiddo and they are turning the chair over, kicking the wall, focusing on the fact that they're kicking the wall really just means that there is a skill, a lagging or a lacking skill that is happening that person doesn't have in order to regulate. And again, it's teaching, like we talked about in the video about the window of tolerance, being able to identify what's really going on here. Now, in order to be able to do that, we also have to recognize what state we're in. Okay. And when I'm talking about state, that's that continuum of stress. State dependence means that you have to be in the same state that you were when you acquired the knowledge or the skill in order to be able to retain it again. And our brains are going to try very, very hard to send us different messages. And I'm going to use kind of an easy example. I was driving on a 2-lane road several years ago, very distracted about something going on in my personal life. And I went to pass, and here comes a car. Like I almost caused a wreck. And my fault I was not in my cortex. I was in my limbic system. Heart starts racing. So, I mean, this was probably 12 years ago. Every time I get on a 2-lane road, my brain takes me straight back to that, what we call state dependence, right? Oh my gosh, here we are. That rut is big and deep. The opposing thing is true when we're working maybe with a kiddo and we're doing some skill building and they are in that state of alert, right? They're not dysregulated, they're alert, they're accessing their cortex, they're able to demonstrate that skill, and we tell ourselves they've got it or we've got it, right? And then a situation happens again, and let's say they're dysregulated, they are in their limbic system or their midbrain, and we go, you know you can do this, right? You did it before, but you can't, again, access that skill or that information over here when you're in your limbic system or in your midbrain, when you acquired it in your cortex. So you have to get regulated. So oftentimes we'll tell kids, what were you thinking? Truly, they weren't thinking. They weren't able to access their cortex. Maybe easier to say, what were you feeling? That a kiddo might be able to describe. But what were you thinking? Really, cortex not engaged. And then when the kiddo says, I don't know, right? It looks like non-compliant behavior. Or when we tell kids, well, why don't you just go think about that for a while? Best thing to do is to recognize the state. And once you really become familiar with those 4 areas of the brain, you can say, oh my gosh, like I'm dysregulated. I am in my midbrain or my limbic system when I really need to be up in my cortex. So recognizing our state and then knowing how to regulate, recognizing which part of our brain is regulating our behavior, and then knowing how to get, where are we and where do we want to be? There are times when we're in our cortex, like at 3 a.m, when we're thinking about stuff and we really need to be in our brainstem, relaxed and going to sleep. So just being aware of where am I, what state am I in, and where do I need to go? Okay, so then this particular tool, if you get nothing else from our information today, the power of mirror neurons is just absolutely amazing. Anybody can do it, and I'm sure all of us have this experience. If I had an infant in my hands right now, we would be probably bouncing and I would be looking at them. And if they were the slightest bit dysregulated or unhappy, I would start cooing and talking like a baby, and I would eventually, hopefully, get that baby to mirror what it is that I'm doing, right? We can get them to calm down. We can get them to mirror my neurons. Oh my gosh, suddenly baby quits crying and baby feels so much better. The brain, it's really based on imitation and empathy. Now, we don't think twice about doing that with infants. It becomes increasingly more difficult as people age, right? Egos get in the way. It's not super fabulous to think about doing this with a teenager that might be in our face saying some not kind things, right? If we can keep ourselves regulated, and I have to tell you, I practice this driving all the time. We can keep ourselves regulated. The power of somebody else mirroring that is huge. But with a quickness, remember those pathways, our brains can become dysregulated, and then we're going to up it, right? Up in stress, down in our brain. So if I'm in my cortex and I'm saying I'm thinking this is okay, and then this person begins to behave in a way that is puzzling to me or disturbing to me, and I become stressed out, I go down in my brain, up in stress, and that person goes with me. So when you have a conflict, people up it until there's a collision and sometimes an explosion. Okay? If I can stay regulated, stay up in my brain, and this person is dysregulated and they're going down in the brain, if I stay here and I'm aware, the chances of this person just coming and meeting me up here where I want them to be is much greater. Okay, this is incredibly difficult if we are tired, if we are hungry, if we have just reached our end with a particular situation, we're just exhausted, our egos get in the way, especially when you look at sort of the parent-child hierarchy, right? I told you to do it, this is the way it needs to be. But just remember, if you can really think about how powerful mirror neurons are, that's one tool that is really life-changing, no matter where you go. Okay, next one.
Margery, just so you know, we have about 5 more minutes. So.
I think we're just about finished.
Okay.
This is really more about when we're looking at teaching. You have to connect before you can correct. If we're not in relationship with somebody, it's going to be incredibly difficult to try to correct any kind of behavior without that connection. And the reason is connection creates safety. I feel safe. I know that if Kathy tells me that I need to do this thing differently, it's not because I'm a bad human. We're connected. I know that I'm safe with her. So this is a very difficult concept when it comes to school. Again, think about kids walking into the classroom or a home environment. They are in a state of alarm, right? And then there's a correction that comes in. If I'm not connected to you and I'm not regulated, there's an opportunity for some dysregulation. Okay, next one. Again, this is just some information about connecting. If the adults can stay regulated and really connect with another person, not just a child, but another person, based on not task completion or behavior compliance. And that's what so much of our world is based around, task completion and behavior compliance. So if I don't do these two things right, then I'm not connected. And then that is only going to fuel my sense of not being safe. If my belonging is only contingent upon how well I can do these two things, and I know I can't, I'm not going to feel safe. And I am going to be in a dysregulated state. Okay. Yeah, and again, these are just like some of the traps that we fall into in terms of being adults and being wanting to sort of fix behavior right away. And we fall into these because we're oftentimes dysregulated, and it's hard for us. All righty, I think maybe there's just, yeah, and then the difference between punishment and discipline. Next one. Discipline is really teaching. When we talked about those lagging or lacking skills, what skill does this particular human need in order to be able to cope with this particular situation? What emotional skill typically is it? So identifying the feeling. And this is where, next one, this is where emojis can come in. Oftentimes, again, we get attached to the emotion. People need to be allowed to feel. We shouldn't punish for feeling, right? It's an opportunity to teach. What do you do? How do you feel? And then what do you do with that feeling? What's an okay way to demonstrate how you feel? Okay, next one. And then this is just a great way to help kiddos identify what are you really feeling? And this is, as you know, just a few of the many opportunities. Okay, and that is my presentation for today. I am so grateful I got to spend some time with you. And
the emoji chart has come a long way from the original one. I remember the black and white one, and now we've got lots of emojis.
yeah, that might be one benefit of the texting world.
One of, yeah, maybe. Thank you, Margery. Wow. Your little ball was probably the best illustration I've seen. It just makes a lot of sense. Just the hands-on getting us focused. So that was really good. Thank you so much. And from the teachers from the school, I think we've got some tools to go there too.
Great.
So thank you for your time sharing. Yes.
Thanks, Margery.
Have a great weekend.
That was Carrie saying thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, Carrie.
Everybody that's here, make sure you go to your email and get the new link, because the original link got corrupted. So I just emailed a new link for this last session. I'll see you soon. And thank you, Margery.
Thank you.